Faculty Club welcomes its members and their esteemed guests on behalf of our President, Mr. Shai Gupta, our Vice President, Mrs. Manish Megun, and Convener Art and Culture, Mr. Bibas Pichu. We at Faculty Club take great pride in hosting this event, which is a book discussion with a difference. As the author, Mr. Dan Morrison, has an online presence, and this discussion will take place between Mr. Vivek Sahai, Mr. Sandeep Roy, and Mr. Ashok Vishwanathan. Without further ado, I would like the panelists to preside over the book discussion and take on the proceedings. Thank you.
Hello. Hi Dan, good to see you again. So, welcome Ashok and Vivek. We are All the Past, a group dealing with stories of our history and legacy. Our mission is to build pride in Kolkata's heritage. Only if we can collectively appreciate our antecedents can we truly become heirs and guardians of our legacy, to respect, preserve and love. We bring to you a discussion of the book, The Poisoner of Bengal. This is a masterful narrative of investigative reportage. A 225-page novel has the Pakur murder as a central plot. It segues deftly into vivid descriptions of central Kolkata, colonial Kolkata, the contrasting lifestyles of the zamindars and the Bengalis, and the British. It dives into details about toxins. It talks about Hollywood and Sherlock Holmes. It also deals with the investigation and the legal procedure. Not once does it falter or ramble. It pulls you in from the beginning to end. Thank you, Dan, for this wonderful book. Dan Morrison's writing on science, culture, and conflict has appeared in outlets including the New York Times, National Geographic, Art Forum, and BBC. A former New York crime reporter and foreign correspondent in South Asia, he is currently Deputy World Editor at the national newspaper USA Today. Working his way through archives and libraries on 3 continents, Dan Morrison has dug deep into trial records, police files, witness testimonies, and newspaper clippings to investigate what he calls the oldest of crimes, fratricide, executed with utterly modern tools. He expertly plots every twist and turn of this repelling yet riveting story right up to the killer's cinematic last stand. Today we have a very eminent panel. At the outset, I regret to announce that Sandeep is unwell and we will have to make do without his valuable insights. Vivek Sahai is from Patna. After studying in Dhanbad, Patna and Delhi, he joined the IPS in 1988 and was allotted the West Bengal Cadre. Post his retirement, he was DG Home Guards and is working as chairperson the West Bengal Staff Selection Commission. Apart from serving in places all over West Bengal, he has had multiple exposure to central government and United Nations assignments. He is an avid sportsman and blogs at viveksahai.com. The writings contain threads like policing, adapting to and assimilating a new culture and an intense love for Kolkata and its people. Ashok Vishwanathan is a much feted scholar. He has august credentials. He is a national and international award-winning filmmaker who is a professor, dean, and a governing and academic council member at Satyajit Film and Television Institute, Kolkata. He has directed more than 150 film projects, documentaries, shorts, and television shows. He has acted in numerous films and is an active theatre worker with performances and drama direction in more than 50 plays. Apart from participating in the national awards, he has had 6 Indian Panorama entries at the International Film Festival of India. He is a Charles Wallace Scholar at Downing College, Cambridge, and has won many other laurels. He has been the chairman of the jury at various film festivals. He has been a visiting professor at Tufts University, Boston, and Monmouth University, New Jersey. He is a prolific public speaker and debater, having lectured widely in India and abroad. He writes regularly in mainstream media as well as in academic journals on film and theatre. He He is a published poet and author. Besides contributions to anthologies of poetry, he is a president of Poetry Paradigm, the leading society for poets in Eastern India. So I would like to thank Ruby Bhatt, sitting in the first row. She is a doyen in textiles, and my love for her is absolutely, unparalleled. And she remembered me when Dad was looking around for someone to help her with this book, and she connected me with them. So I'm very, very grateful for that. I would like to thank Juggernaut Publications, Mr. Prabhas Kichu, and the Saturday Club for their generosity. I am going to read out a few lines from Dad's book, which are Poetic Justice for the Chosen Venue. A seductive description of Calcutta on page 3 reads, Calcuttans were fond lovers of jazz music. A mile south, just off Park Street, John Abriani 6, featuring the dimple-chinned South African Al Boli, were midway through a 2-year stand, entertaining well-heeled and well-connected audiences at the Tony Saturday Club. So here we are at the Saturday Club, Tony as ever, and we have Dan Morrison with his conversations on the book with Vivek and Ashok. So let's start with Dan. Dan, would you just give us an introduction and start the conversation, and then we'll hand it to Ashok.
Well, good evening and good morning. Thank you all for having me. Really appreciate it. To just give you a sign that you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, very good. So in investigating the Pankar Raj murder, what I found was more than just a crazy and demented homicide. I found a lost world about which not a lot had been written, and that is India and Kolkata in the interwar years, that jazz age Calcutta, when the whole world is about to change and none of the participants are aware. No one can imagine what's coming, but they're living in a time of swelling changes and cataclysmic change. There's cultural change, there's political change, there's scientific and medical advancements and the misuse and abuse of those advancements, and they're all converging at the same time in the same place. I could go on, or I could take your questions.
All right. First of all, congratulations, Dan, for this wonderful tome, and wonderful in several ways, because one is full of wonder while reading it. It is investigative journalism at its best, and at its most difficult because it's delving into the past, which is something very rare, number one. Number two, as Dan himself points out, all of it is based on facts. Facts, facts, and facts. As Leon Trotsky put it once, facts speak with a conscience. In that sense, this is a conscience keeper for us who stay in a city called Kolkata now, Calcutta then. The film is unique if it were to be made into a film, because it is very cinematic in its presentation. It's vivid in its visual imagery. It is also deeply researched, but the research doesn't come at you as if it is in the face. It's there. The research is apparent at a subterranean level. It makes it all the more interesting. So in a sense, Dan Morrison, although he's writing something which is based on what happened really, is comparable to the great Agatha Christie in his knowledge of poisons. She was also very, very fond of, delving into different kinds of poison, because she was working during the war effort, and that was during the First World War. And this interwar years is a very important time in the world, globally. It's a time in which bizarre things were happening. As Dan rightly pointed out, the world was changing once and for all, never to become the same again. But Calcutta was unique. As the book said, the second city of the British Empire, it was perhaps the second culturally vibrant city of the world, and yet the way Dan describes the city is so endearing, it's so valuable, and it's so genuine. You can actually feel the heat, the patches of damp, the way the hustle and bustle of Powder Station, which exists even today. You can feel it, you can sense that you are there. It's a book that transports you, and it creates in you an imagination for the past. The book has many, many features which we shall talk about, but the first question I'd not ask Dan right away. I'd rather like to talk to my co-speaker here, because he came up with some very, very interesting insights in the conversation that we've been having so far. So, Mr. Sahai, given your experience as a man of the law, who has ample experience in investigation and intelligence, what would you say is the single most significant fact that struck you when you read the book?
Thank you. You see, even as we are today in an immersive conversation with Dan, what has really struck me is the trajectory of the investigation. Today, in Calcutta, the death and rape of a medical intern has again put our focus on the way police investigates cases. And I would request him to read out from page 155. This will give our audience a much more edifying view of the great Calcutta police as we all know, we have known it. I tell in this case, this whole thing starts from Pakur, which is not in the state. It is in Santhal Parganas, now Jharkhand. A diminutive lawyer, Kalidas, he picks up the issue, and then the case is lodged in Tollyganj police station. The detective department, it takes up the case. Coordination, even in Mumbai or Bombay, from where the virus was procured. And arrests entail absolutely, you just feel like as if you're reading the Day of the Jackal, it's so racy, the way they arrest the main accused by call the station master in Asansol, and the GRP of Asansol comes in. So having said that, the raciness and the thoroughness of the investigation is really hits in the face. But Dan, would you oblige by reading out that paragraph on page 155 of this Juggernaut publication about the Detective Department of Calcutta Police in 1934?
Yes, sir. Thank you. We'll start with 27 murders have been recorded in Calcutta during 1933. Assistant Commissioner Shaktipada Chakrabarti now began a confidential inquiry into what now appeared to be the 28th. The Detective Department had over 60 Muslim and Hindu officers, men of diverse talents who were at home in any setting, from gambling den to lecture hall. The busy roster included writers and poets and a trained Malvi. Their individual dress ranged from suit and bow tie to kurta and dhoti. Some of the bloodhounds went bareheaded, others wore takia or fez. Some were built like wrestlers, and some were as thin as apprenticed clerks. In the variety of crimes he faced, the high and low cultures he inhabited, and the humid grandeur of Calcutta, a detective at Bazaar arguably held the best police job on earth, topping his counterparts in London, New York, Istanbul, and even Bombay. Each man was a prince of the city with unique freedom of movement and inquiry.
It's very illuminating. So the detective department, we all knew it, has a very rich history. Calcutta police was one of the best in the world. So this is a very interesting point. The other interesting area is the nature of the investigation, which Sahai has talked about, the way the tentacles of the department were spread out. And this coordination between railways, this is also a difficult area, don't you think? Is it not just one, it's not just Eastern Railway. Can you clarify this?
Well, we had the different, that was the Eastern Railway, but there are so many railway zones. Here, the main thing was that you are able to catch on the basis of an information communicated to you by someone seeing the passengers list on the bogie, then communicating, then you telling that to the station master in Asansol. You may say Calcutta and Asansol is just like that, but given the standards of today's coordination, I can tell you this is high class. Even what he did in Bombay, it is high class. And this whole investigation, I mean, the prosecution has placed trust not on experts, but the general reputation of the doctors to come and give evidence. It was very modern by those standards. The use of the virus itself, I don't think there were any SOPs, that is standing operating procedures as to how to go about leading evidence and conducting trial, leading evidence in a manner which is acceptable to the courts, and then getting the conviction. It's all novel. It's very, very novel by that.
I just want to interrupt here. I just want to ask Dan something very important. The crucial point about this novel is the poison, you know, and the poison is actually a virus. Probably this might be the first ever case of a murderer using a technique like this. How would you react to that?
It was a great idea for a homicide conspiracy. It almost succeeded, and that's if you can make a tribute to a killer, they almost pulled it off, and they were so deadly was the plague bacteria, so bereft of a cure was the plague, that it was considered a sure thing that their victim would die, and he did die. The only place they went wrong was likely in the culture and the storage of the bacteria which they pilfered from the Arthur Road Hospital in Bombay. And I suspect that in the time they spent between pilfering these germs and applying them, which is several months, I believe that the temperature of the makeshift laboratory near the Alipur courthouse is probably what did them in, is that the germs were stored and experimented with at a temperature higher than is optimal for the plague bacteria, which made these very virulent bacteria less virulent, allowing the victim to survive for 8 days instead of 4, which was the average lifespan for a person infected with plague, going back to the third plague pandemic of the 1890s. So they banked on 4 days. He lasted 8. He lasted 7.5, and that's what did them in.
Well, Vinayendra, the Poisoner of Bengal, the protagonist, antagonist of your novel, how did he get access to this very special laboratory which would not have allowed anyone? You described it very beautifully in the book. Can you tell us how actually he, with his associates, got access to that laboratory? Because without that access, I don't think the culture would have been possible.
So it's something that's almost, not entirely, but almost unthinkable to say that a zamindar from Kolkata, from Bengal, could wash up in Bombay and start showing up at the homes of various scientists at the country's leading, one of the country's leading research centers, and just start inquiring, where can I get some? As if he were, shopping for bananas or almond or something. And there are two things that struck me very much about this. One is that every man who was approached for these germs, including the many who turned him down, none reported this to their superiors. None sent it up the chain. There's a lack of professional accountability that sort of pervades this case. It's very, very, very loose. Things are very loose, even though the rules are tight. The actions are loose. Our protagonist, the Raja of Pakur, Benayendra Pandey, finally finds a taker. He finds the head of the Arthur Road Hospital in Bombay, which has a laboratory, and which is at this point the only hospital in Bombay which is approved for dealing with plague cases, and thus has access to the germs. They make a double-blind, corrupt deal in which Benayendra goes to him for treatments for phantom pain and pays him handsomely. And the head of the hospital makes the laboratory available to Benayendra and his comrade, Dr. Taranam. The head of the Arthur Road Hospital believes that he's taking them for a ride. He believes their story, that they're trying to find a cure for plague based on iodine. The iodine cure had been discredited for decades, and the head of the Arthur Road Hospital knew it as well as anyone. He details the failures in his own book on diseases in India. He wrote a book on the subject, and he details what a failure it was. He believes he's taking these Calcutta rubes for a ride, when in fact they're taking him for a ride because they're not looking for a cure. They're looking to culture one of history's greatest killers and to take it home with them, and they succeed.
Yes. So that's what makes it fascinating, interesting. It's actually a tale of two brothers, really. For those who haven't read the book, you must read it. Vinayendra and Amorendra. Unfortunately, Amorendra dies very early, not only in the book, but he dies very early in life. Probably at the age of 22, if I'm not wrong. But we still get an insight into his character. And the fact that Dan mentions that a slight slip up on the part of the murderers allowed him to live that much longer gives us a little more time to understand him. So, completely different in character, the two brothers. This film is also a chronicle in human psychology, motivation, and it creates a wonderful milieu. So, would you like to say something, Sahai, about the kind of world that this novel conjures up?
Actually, if you ask me, it is so multi-layered, the kind of world which he has conjured up. And before I ask him any content question, I would like to ask him a process question for our readers. You have accessed archives across continents, libraries, books, internet, whatnot, and you have even accessed unpublished memoirs. I think your entire journey of collecting information itself should be the matter of a book. So can you just tell us about your experience in accessing these your sources, your rich and very variegated sources, including that very, very admirable getting hold of unpublished memoirs.
Thank you. So I guess there are three layers. There are official public bodies with archives, principally for this book, the British Library, which included the entire trial record was sitting there. It was donated by the family of one of the two Calcutta High Court judges who confirmed the murder conviction, and that was. He had a bound edition of the entire trial, all of the depositions, all of the evidence, the log of everything. And that had been sitting in the British Library for 20 years almost, by the time I found it. It is my understanding that the copy of the trial record that should reside at the Calcutta High Court is missing. And so what this has done is that this has denied two generations of Indian historians and researchers and journalists the opportunity to crack into this case. It was only because my work had me passing through London once or twice a year that I was able to piecemeal go through the 1,000-odd pages of the trial record. That's not that's not an opportunity available to everyone. And so basically I'm able to do this because others were somehow robbed of the opportunity. But first you have these public bodies, and then in Calcutta and in Bihar there are numerous private, family-endowed little archives, little neighborhood libraries essentially, that have been endowed by trusts, in the years past, that still have these vast stores of newspapers and books. So these must be places that are, that I found very welcoming. So in getting the newspaper records, that's where a lot of it came. For example, the Bihar newspaper, The Searchlight, it's not available online anywhere. It has not been digitized. It is not, it's hard to get. The National Library has very strict rules about how much material you can access in a single day. They seem nonsensical to me compared to the standards of access in other places. But these small neighborhood archives were wide open and welcoming, and a stranger could just come in and access the knowledge as knowledge is meant to be accessed. The third level, and the most difficult, is family memoirs. And while foreign researchers will often complain about the conservation of material outside the West, in countries outside the West, that there's less investment and care taken to conserving materials, I think when it comes to, what I found was when it comes to actually families, there's no difference from a family in the UK or a family in the US or a family in, say, Egypt or India, that by the third generation, nobody knows where grandmother's things are. It's impossible to find. So, I was looking for, say, the journals of Lionel Colson, who was the Kolkata police commissioner, and it was impossible. I went looking for, all down the chain, all of the officers. I went looking for anything that they might have written, their letters, their writings, and it was extremely difficult. I scored on two grounds. I found Lionel Colson's wife's memoirs that one of their grandsons found for me. It took him a year to find that, right? A year of contact before he was able to locate that. And I still don't know exactly where he located it. But it took that sort of persistence of continuing to check in with him. Similarly with LeBrock, who headed the detective department. He wrote very little about the case. Some of it wound up in the British Library, but his wife wrote a long memoir of her time in India. And that provides the color of how that class of people lived in Calcutta in those years. And they loved it. It was a fairyland for them.
I just ask another process question. because I think Vibha wants to ask a question after that. That is, this is one way your research, which is absolutely incredible, unbelievable, whatever you want to say. But the other is you have this mass of material, which is all documentary in nature, factual, facts. How did you manage to put it into such a readable manner, so reader-friendly? It's like fiction, it reads like fiction. What was the process here?
So I'm a journalist. That's my profession, and yeah, it's often a trap for journalists when they write longer nonfiction, in that they are heavily reliant on their notebook and heavily reliant on the facts, and it requires a lot of sort of discipline, self-discipline, and care for the reader. That you have to, like a rocket that's launching up, right? You have to drop those stages of the rocket to get to orbit, to reach orbit, and that means shedding a lot of interesting and fascinating details that might bog down the actual narratives. And as a researcher, you go out and you find really interesting and cool things, and you want to show them to the world. But that sometimes works against the actual narrative of the story. And if it's working against the narrative, it's working against the reader, and you have to work for the reader. So it takes a lot of discipline. The original manuscript for this was 25,000 words longer. I had to I had to carefully scalpel away 25,000 words to make it something that would be rewarding for a reader, as opposed to rewarding for the writer who wants to show every shiny thing that he found.
So yours is a work of sculpture in a sense. You sculpted the entire novel, if I may call it that. Now, over to Vibha, she wanted to ask something with relevance to the condition that we are in today.
So, Vivek, during our discussions, Vivek had pointed this out, that there are a lot of parallels with the Archie Court case now, because both of them were cremated soon after, and they just got managed to pull out a blood sample. And 100 years ago, this one lawyer managed to go through all the evidence and discover the solution. So that's quite incredible. So Vivek, would you like to ask Dan something relevant to that?
Not really, because now as I said, the investigation was done with a thoroughness, which I've already spoken about. The present investigation really cannot talk about much, in the sense that it's still in the process. I had a slightly different question. It is in this book, 1933-34. The capital has been transferred to Delhi in 1912 with the Bar announcement. The province of Bihar has been created by the same announcement. But when you read in this book, what he covers, we can see that Calcutta remains the #1 city. It just doesn't seem that the capital has shifted. It also just doesn't seem as if a new province has been created. The number of Bengalis in the legal, in the administrative, and the educational setup in Bihar is all Sarkar, Mukherjee's, Sanyas and all. So, 34 is, the third decade of the last century is really very interesting, and as Mr. Ashok said, and so did the author. It was a moment of change without people realizing as to where we are. Just for the members here, I would seek indulgence in one of your chapters called Hello, page 138, 139. These are again excerpts from these unpublished memoirs. I remember as an ADC to the governor, I had read this book, The Government House. And those days I always said that even after the capital has shifted, from 20th of December to something like 10th of January, the Viceroy would come back and the races would be run and the balls would be held and all that. There's a very beautiful description of that in page 138, which is basically the lament of a person who has not been invited to Lord Wellington's ball. If you could read it out.
Yes, sir. Thank you. The Belvedere Ball was the hottest ticket of the frantic Calcutta social calendar, with thousands of upper crust Indians eager to rub shoulders with the Viceroy, Lord Wellington, and just a few lucky hundreds allowed in. Rejected elites were sometimes slow to accept their fate. Wellington's military secretary had the unappealing duty of fielding the aggrieved, imploring letters of those business executives, nobles, and other eminences who hadn't made the cut. Quote, "It is needless to mention the fact that almost all of our relations have got the privilege of getting the invitations in the said function. And I do not understand the reason why my sister and my wife have been omitted when we stand English etiquette thoroughly well, and we have been brought up in a thorough European manner in every respect. And being the first cousins of the late Dowager Maharani of Kuch Behar," one scorned aristocrat complained.
That's wonderful. So this means that while writing apparently non-fiction, his book is satirical. There's a strong element of satire. But I wanted to always ask him this. We did talk a bit about this when we had an online interaction some time back. Would you call this a novel, a work of fiction? How would you define it?
So in the world that I come up in, this is called nonfiction. Everything is based on facts. And when I say based on facts, when I say someone said X, it's because it's been written down in testimony that someone said it or someone heard someone say it. It's based on documentary evidence of the trial, the court papers, personal reminiscences, newspaper clippings, and things like that. There's no license in words or deeds or actions. What you have is contextualization that brings in the historical context and makes it more of a story than just a courtroom procedural.
While agreeing with you, I certainly agree with you. But having said that, you have used certain techniques very beautifully that gives it the veneer of fiction, you know. You move back and forth, which is a very beautiful way of presenting fiction. Again, I bring in the cinematic metaphor. The flashback and the flash forward were the thing that cinema was made of. To rephrase what Humphrey Bogart said in The Maltese Falcon, he said, "This is the stuff that dreams are made of," quoting from Shakespeare. But he's used the flashback and the flash forward very inventively. He's also used a little bit of commentary, which Tagore does in his novels, you know. In the novels and in the short stories of Rabindranath Tagore, who was the expert at the short story, you know. He defined the short story as Choto Pran, Choto Bata, Choto Choto Dukh Kotha, Nitant Shohoj Shorul. And the end would be Shesh Hoye Hoidona Shesh. Dan here has used commentary in a very, very adroit, intelligent, humorous, and thought-provoking manner. So there are certain techniques which are used in fiction. So he's used those, and it doesn't detract from the essential validity or the veracity or the verisimilitude of the entire text, which is something that he must be given credit for. Would you agree with that, Dan?
Well, certainly on the non-provoking aspect, the last thing I would want to do is provoke a Calcutta audience. But the story is not a traditional whodunit. It's clear to all whether they want to fully digest it or not. They all know. Everyone knows what has happened. Everyone has known what will happen. The protagonists, or the victim and his family, they are landlords. They have centuries of living off of essentially passive income. They are not active doers. They are not active verbs. They live off the sweat of others, right? And they're not trained for action, and they're not trained for breaking out of their assumptions. And they know what is happening, and they cannot act. There are two active people in this milieu. There's the killer, who is a 20th century man. He has so many of the 20th century values that are derided by traditionalists. He is selfish. He is dynamic. He favors his own interests over those of his group and over the traditions and assumptions of his clan and of his line. And the other is Kalidas Gupta, who is firmly entrenched in all of those traditions, and yet finds it within himself to also break out of the pattern of passivity and to essentially use his own shoe leather and break this case. And now I've been rambling and I forgot what your initial question was, sir.
Thank you. Very well put. I'll just add something here. Although it's a work of non-fiction, as you say, sticking to the facts, you have drawn out certain moments very beautifully. I think Vibha will agree. Imagine those 8 days in which there was just a glimmer of hope for Amarendra to survive. For he had survived the earlier onslaught. He had been attacked earlier with the passes on his, on his nose. It was tetanus. It was tetanus that was used to infect him, but somehow he had emerged with the help of the doctor. This time too, the moment has been, albeit sadly, brought out by Dan, that the blood test was done, and Dan actually describes the whole process of how the flask was kept straight even while moving in the car, so that there would be no spill out, and it would be hoped that the bacteria would reveal itself by devouring whatever was there. So I would say a strong medical sensibility and a sense of what is beyond the ordinary qualifies these moments. Did you do some medical research, or do you have an insight into medicine, because you've gone into it in great detail and explained some not so easily understood facts in a manner that will be easily understood by an audience? Well, I have a background in science writing and in environmental research and scientific research, and I came to this case. I stumbled upon it while doing more broad research on cholera and plague in India in the 1920s and 30s. That was my rather unfocused but very interesting subject. I was just running around, just trying to see what I could see. And when I happened upon this case while searching for an unpublished biography of a figure named Waldemar Haffkine, who had created the first vaccines for cholera, which he was brought to India to administer. And then when plague erupted in 1896, he very quickly created the first vaccine for plague. So I was on to Haffkine, even coming on. Haffkine was a tangent of a tangent. Now while looking for Haffkine, I found another tangent, and it was this crime. And that became my main motive. My main subject of research was
was this case. So I had some background, but also I had, thanks to the trial record, that scientist's own recollection, his own description of how he drew the victim's blood and the great care that he took. And it was striking to me, and I hope it's striking for audiences, just how thoughtful he was and how thoughtful they had to be in those days in the chain of possession of a sample. Now we can go anywhere. I can go across the street and get my blood taken. You know what I mean? Anyone can do it. You know, it doesn't take a tremendous amount of training these days because the systems are so well made that you know, anyone can do it. In those days, it took a lot of work and a lot of care, and he applied that care. It's also an interesting contrast to me that the care that same researcher and his uncle, who was one of the leading doctors of Calcutta, and their colleagues at the Calcutta School of Tropical Medicine, they applied the utmost attention to detail in culturing and identifying and confirming that it was plague in the victim's blood, and not one of them said a word to the police.
I would like to just add that you have done such beautiful vignettes of life in Calcutta. So when you talk about Sujrawala, you talk about the life of the widows, and then you touch upon you know, the lifestyle of the British versus the lazy stupor of the Bengalis, and there are many such you know, kind of incidents, and they are very, very familiar to us, and you actually got it spot on. So did you observe them, or did you see movies or books? How did you get that sensibility so correctly? There are many such. I just give you 2 examples.
So I read memoirs and other books from the era, from different authors. I spent some time with a historian, Kirti Narayan, whose father wrote the autobiography of an unknown Indian. I went to visit him, and he had very lucid memories of the time and of his elders and the life that people. Kirti Narayan Chowdhury, and so that's how there was no one volume or tone that said it all. I had to piecemeal find the colors to paint that portrait of what sounded like a really terrific life for members of the aristocracy and of the upper class and of the colonial administrative class. It sounds like a life that anyone would envy living.
2 things, 2 comments. That's Nirad Chaudhary you're talking about, right? Yes, Nirad Chaudhary.
Yes. Yeah, I spoke to Nirad's son. I went to visit him and spoke with him.
Yeah. So he has a very iconoclastic views, or he had. I had the occasion to talk to him on many occasions. Well, iconoclastic, but very, very definite and very erudite too, you know. If he uses German or French quotations in his novels, he would not give the translations. You would expect that you knew it. That was Nirad for you, and he was equally critical of the British as he was of the Indians. Now, in your book, there's satire, there's gentle humor, but what is most striking is the fact that amidst all this, you have also entered into the world of cinema, as it was then. And you talk of a particular little-known film that I think Vinoyendra saw sometime just after the silent era. As you know, the silent era gave way to the sound era in 1927 with a film called The Jazz Singer, made by Warner Brothers. The director was a man called Alan Crosland, and the main actor was Al Jolson. And Dan, you'll appreciate this. The first words that Al Jolson said on screen was, "You haven't heard anything yet." He was right. So I want to ask you, how and why did you think that this intermixing with cinema and indeed Vinoyendra's fascination for the moving picture, how did it find a place in your novel?
So by the early 1930s, cinema is expanding thoroughly across the subcontinent, right? It's in not only in the big cities, but there are dozens of tent cinemas that traveling from town to town show movies. And while it's still largely a pursuit of what you call the middle class or the upper classes, like most of the crew, what you call the working class or the peasant class, could not afford to see the movies, there's an abiding, a ceaseless and fervent concern on the part of both Indian traditionalists and of the colonial authorities on the corrupting influence that cinema must surely be having on the youth. And they find this particularly in the American movies, because and the American crime films. Because what these films show, these gangster films and these adventures show, they show the Anglos behaving no differently from anyone else. They are committing crimes, they're getting loaded, they're fooling around. And this really bothers the British authorities, that it is, that among what they would call the colored populations of their empire, that it is diminishing respect for whites and diminishing respect for white women, and it drives them insane. That's the first part. Did you want to ask something?
No, I just want to read one line. When you come to the end of book 226, because the cinematic metaphor has been used, you end very beautifully that particular chapter by saying, by refusing to yield in the face of certain defeat, Binoy had guaranteed himself a most cinematic exit. Unlike Amarendra, he died the hero of his own epic and chose the moment of his own death. Yes, you want to ask something?
One last question from me. The plot, the research is absolutely fascinating, but I just love the way you write, man. You bring up all the five senses: sound, the smell, sight, everything is there in your book. I will just quote a small one. For me, you bring alive the sepia period absolutely colorfully. The taxi wove a path through Calcutta's thick light bird of plodding ox carts, horse-drawn tongas, diesel lorries, electric tram cars, and man-bull rickshaws. Attached to this is the last question. The headings of the chapters are very, very interesting. The viper's tooth, the borrowpenny, as meat is dangerous for the child, I will see you, doctor, Chota Peg, Vendetta. All very fascinating. And I think the reader, the moment he sees the caption, he just wants to go through the chapters immediately. Can you just tell us? I mean, some people, they don't even name the chapter, they just number it. Some do it. You do it in a very fascinating way.
Close to us.
So a comment on that. Thank you. On craft.
I just think you've got to keep it interesting. You've got to keep it engaging for the reader. You've got to send the hints that you can send. You just got to make it interesting. I'm a newsman, and the headlines have to be good.
Yes, if I may, I'll make a very bad joke, Since you're the newsman, as you said, apparently there was a jester who felt he could pun on any subject under the sun, except the king, because he felt the king was on the subject. So the king ordered his execution because he had inadvertently or otherwise punned on his name. So when the noose was being placed around his neck, word freight came from the king saying that you will be pardoned if you promise never to part again. And he said, no news is good news, and died happily. I think we've come to the end of a very, very interesting discussion. Before we close, is there anyone who wants to say anything from the audience? So, a quick comment, but we have just 2 or 3 minutes, and then we will continue.
I just wanted to know, how did you happen to stumble on this story? What is the background?
Well, he just mentioned it. He was doing research, and just repeat it, just for the benefit. You said it.
Sure. It comes out of my failure to complete another book. My first book was a book on the Nile River, and the follow-up was supposed to be a book on the Ganga. And I traveled the length of the Ganga from the Meru Glacier all the way down through Bangladesh to the Sundarbans. But the book itself could not come together. But while working on that book and researching that book, I started looking at the Ganga water. I started looking more at environmental issues and questions. And then from there, that led me into cholera, and then into plague, and then into trying to find a missing manuscript, a missing biography of this man Hafkin, who developed the first vaccines for both diseases. And while researching, looking for Hafkin, essentially, I found a small little news item in an Irish newspaper that said that the plague germs used to kill the poor victim had come from the Hafkin Institute. And that's only, it was only because I was searching for the word Hafkin that I came across this murder case at all. And that little item led me into a whole other vein and chain of research that led to this book that I'm going to come out to hear about.
Thank you.
Thank you, that was very interesting.
Yes, one more question from the other side.
Can you pass the mic over?
You were talking about the police stations that he would work, and he would be, it would be better to be working in Kolkata, the capital police station. And you mentioned, I think, London, New York, and you mentioned Istanbul. Why Istanbul? Was Turkey such an important kind of state then?
In terms of what these cities have in common is that they're extremely cosmopolitan, and they have a rich high life and a rich low life, right? And that they have their cities of empire, and they're cities where many cultures are mixing, and so it's a very rewarding thing to read about Istanbul, whether it's present day, whether it's in any century, 17th, 18th, 19th, going back to the 12th century. If you want to read about Istanbul, it's one of the great world cities, and it's one of the great cities for stories and for people and narratives. Check it out.
I will.
Thank you.
I'm doing a lot of reading on Istanbul now.
Anyone else? Yes.
I just wanted to convey the greetings of Devanshu Datta, who I believe has edited this book, and who I had the pleasure of dining with last night. He did tell me well in advance that it was a very, very pacey narrative. So congratulations on that. I look forward to reading the book in person.
Well, thank you. The editors at Juggernaut did great work on the book, and there I believe 2 little slips that he caught for me that would not have been little had they made it to print, and I really appreciate his efforts.
Devanshu is a very interesting character. He's my cousin, in fact. He was a great chess player in his youth. And then, of course, he's got multiple talents, a great quizzer, and he has got a very strong eye for detail. So it's good that you have Devanshu on your team.
Didi, would you like to ask a question? Anyone else?
Anyone else? Otherwise, I'll hand you over, Vibha. Now you speak with the mic, and you can have the last word.
You will ask.
Please use microphone.
This is Ruby Baljaudhary, and she wants to thank you. And
It's great.
How lovely to see you, Ruby.
Yes, and I remember you started discussing about it when you came to my house. That was some years ago. You were just about starting your research at that time. So it's great to see you and look forward to seeing you in your time. Thank you for being here.
So Dan, it's been such a wonderful experience reading your book over again and talking about it also. And indeed, I think we're all privileged, very, very privileged. So the three of us are absolute fans of your book. And we're rooting for you for the Pulitzer. So you should definitely submit it. And we should get your autograph before you get that. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for having me. Thank you, Vibha, for all your terrific work.
Not at all.
Thank you. I appreciate the time and your appreciation, and thank you again, Ruby. You guys have a great evening.
A great pleasure. Thank you. Thank you everyone for being a wonderful audience. Srila, do you want to ask a question?
No, just saying bye.
Saying bye.
Okay, so everyone saying bye and we are breaking up for the evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, good night.